After 1,000 votes in just over 24 hours, 36% of you wanted to see me try and use the new TALA legendary from Inklands in a ramp deck that utilized her lore gain. Well, what you see on screen here is my attempt at integrating the new TALA as well as the new Mr. Smee, which I think is a fantastic card, into the traditional Sapphire Steel list that we saw really picking up steam towards the end of Rise of the Floodborn. I will say that from testing, I played about 6 games. I lost 2 and I won 4. And the games that I lost, one of them was like I was kind of bricked up. I had like 2 Hades and 2 Whole New Worlds. I only played 10 on Inkable, so I just like scooped on turn 3 or something. But the other game, I just found this deck being a little slow. And while the TALA isn't necessarily a detriment, because if you draw her early, she's just ink, I think that you really do need to build the deck around her in order to fully utilize her. Trying to just splash her in, I don't think works too well, which is very odd because when you look at Sapphire Steel, anything that this deck can utilize for non-questing sources of lore would seem very, very strong, since we know towards the mid and end game, the only thing that really slows Sapphire Steel down is Be Prepareds. And if you're not playing against Ruby, this deck should technically do very well into the meta. I did find myself struggling a little bit against aggro, and the match that I lost, the opponent just kept putting up big threats that I just couldn't deal with. Like if I didn't have my Hades and my Let It Goes, their threats were just too big for me to deal with, and the TALA just didn't do enough to close out the game fast enough. And so with that being said, I found it a little hard to use. Now again, that could just be me as a player not using it correctly, which I think is the case, but I do think that this card will require more practice in order to utilize more effectively. And honestly, I think you're better off using this with the 4-costed TALA, so you can shift this on turn 5, because the 4-cost TALA actually looks pretty decent. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's basically like a less powerful version of Gaston, but it costs less and it's inkable, whereas the Gaston is not, right? Instead of looking at top 3, you look at the top 2, you put 1 into your hand, 1 on the bottom, and yes, it doesn't quest for 3, but it's a TALA, so therefore it shifts nicely into the 7-drop legendary. But yeah, I think that you may want to look at building a deck around this card if you were going to use it. There's a lot of cards that help you ramp beyond Fishbone Quill. I just thought that this would be the most competitive version. So enough talk about the concept and the deck list. Let's go ahead and take a look at some matches, and I'll see if I can try to explain some of these concepts in real time. Alright, right up the bat, we're starting off pretty hot, going against the former Tier 1 deck, or at least the ink pairing of the last format in Amethyst Ruby, or Ruby Amethyst. And I think this deck is still poised to be very, very strong in the meta. I will say though, I think the additions that Amber and Emerald got are going to be game changing for the meta. There are some very powerful cards in both of those colors now that really elevate them back up to competitive status. So this opponent here, using some of the new cards, I think that's the new 1-drop Chernobog card that allows you to draw when it quests. But we went first, we established Popsicle and we established Mr. Smee. This is now like your ideal turn 1 and 2, I think, with Sapphire Steel. The opponent inks a Mim Snake, and I'm trying to like read through the new cards that the opponent is playing. I'm familiarized with like most of the, air quotes money cards, but not so much the commons. I'll get more familiar with that over time. So the opponent establishes a Mim Snake, and Mim Snake now, honestly, in the meta, like the fact that it causes you to like air quotes lose tempo makes it a little slower. Whereas look at the Mr. Smee, questing for 2, it still trades up at a 3-costed body. Like the Mr. Smee, as expected when I saw this card on the spoiler, is going to be a banger for Steel for sure. So the opponent continues to lose tempo here, utilizing Mim Fox. We're going to go ahead and just continue to try and get to turn 5, where we can establish the Singer and the Whole New World. Again, Sapphire Steel, I think there's a couple different ways that you can look at playing this now, and I don't really know if it's going to be the force that it was in the last format, because honestly, I just think that Emerald is extremely strong. But again, we'll have to wait and see. So the opponent establishes a location, and they're dumping their hand because they likely know that the Whole New World is coming. So we establish the Beast. We're going to quest with the Hiram, and then just pass. So this is the one limitation of Mr. Smee. If you're not going to crash him to trade 1 for 1, yes, he gets you 2 lore, But if I would have quested and left him exerted, he would have just banished himself, right? The opponent, funnily enough, after dumping their hand, decides to use the Chernobog effect to banish itself to draw a card. So interesting way to kind of go through your deck. But if the opponent anticipates a whole new world, they definitely don't want to be drawing cards. They want to be establishing a board. They dropped the new Genie, which, you know, I thought this card wasn't going to be that good because I think it's also uninkable. Yeah, it's a 4-cost uninkable. But I mean, when it hits the board, you're basically like, well, I guess I kind of have to deal with it. Otherwise, the opponent's going to draw 3. And you might be thinking, well, you know, you can just let them draw their 3 and then whole new world next turn. The issue is they're going to quest next turn. They're going to have 4 fresh cards, right? Because they draw for turn. And then being on 7 ink, they, you know, drawing 4 cards, a good chance they have, or they're going to draw into it. Be prepared. So I'm like, let me just get rid of the beast and, the Genie, by singing Let It Go with the Beast, I believe. And I'm just like, let me just slow things down. I don't necessarily need the whole new world right now. I'd rather establish this Tinkerbell. But now I'm in that same problem that I was talking about in the Decklist video, whereas the only real thing that kind of right now really slows down the Sapphire Steel deck is the Be Prepared. In terms of the board state, there are other cards that definitely deal with Sapphire Steel a lot better now in this format. One of them being the Bare Necessities, and the other one being the new Ursula that rips songs out of your hands. But we do draw into the TALA, so I opt to establish this after getting the Maui off the field. And it looks like we're in a commanding board state. And you can argue, like in a situation like this, I don't want to wheel because I don't want the opponent to get a Be Prepared. They dropped the new Hydra Legendary, which is wild because now I'm like, well, if I do anything to damage this, or if I exert my characters and this new Hydra runs into my characters, it's going to be dealing like basically double damage, right, to whatever it takes. So, if, for example, if I quest with the Grammatala, they run into the Grammatala, they take 4 damage, they deal 6 to my Grammatala, then they can deal an additional 4 to anything. Most likely the Grammatala to take it out, right? So I maybe just should have committed and done it and then smashed it next turn and took in the extra damage. But with these Grammatalas sitting on board, I could technically just do nothing. I'm already at 11 lore, and I could just keep inking each turn, and if I draw into a Fishbone Quill, I'm good. The issue is, yeah, the opponent is going to be establishing their board in the meantime. So this is what I mean when I was talking about in the decklist portion. Like the Grammatala, while it's nice, like look at this lore gain, that's great, like I have to still be able to deal with an opponent's board here. Otherwise, I'm going to be in serious trouble. So I opt to sing the whole new world because I'm like, I want an answer to that Genie. I'd rather have a fresh 7 if I know they're going to draw into a Be Prepared anyways. And on 7 ink here, I could do the Let It Go so that I don't overextend into a Be Prepared, because if I drop Hades here, I am playing into the Be Prepared, even though the Hades is more ink efficient, but it is the body that I would be potentially losing. So I do end up going with the Hades, which you can say is a misplay, and I just quest with everything, anticipating a Be Prepared. The only saving grace here is that, you know, because they have the Hydra on field, they'll be preparing their own Hydra, which means it doesn't really get value off of taking out my Grammatalas, and I'm forcing them to be prepared here, otherwise they lose the game, which means that they have to use up 7 ink because the Hydra costs 6, so they can't sing with it, and that'll leave them on 9 ink, or I don't know if they ink for turn yet, or 3 ink after the Be Prepared, to establish something. Then I can follow up with my threats to end the game being on 16 lore. The opponent is able to deal with my Grammatalas though, which really saves them, because those could have potentially ended the game. All I needed was like a bell or a Fishbone Quill, because then I could ink for turn and then ink off the bell or ink off the Fishbone Quill, and I would win the game. I draw into a Tamatoa here, and you know, the opponent, if you'd noticed, did not play the Be Prepared. Do they even have it? I'm going to opt for a Tamatoa, which again is a little ballsy, considering that, you know, the opponent is likely going to be on a Be Prepared still. But I wanted to get this Popsicle back so that I can continue to draw with the Hiram. I'm drawn to more Popsicles. I literally top deck 3 Popsicles in a row. So I'm like, okay, I'll just establish everything, and I'll go to 19 and say, you have to be prepared, and then I'll establish the board afterwards. That's why I went for the draw. The issue is, if you haven't noticed, these locations are adding up in terms of how much slower they're getting to the opponent. But it turns out the opponent didn't end up having to be prepared, and they kind of just revealed the triple Ursula. And with that, we end up taking the game. So this next match is really interesting in my opinion. I don't know if I actually get the TALA in this one, but it again just shows you how the deck kind of plays now if you're going to try to incorporate this package, which again I don't think is the way you would want to play Sapphire Steel after testing, but I'll continue to test and see what happens. We are going up against Emerald Steel, and as soon as you see this color pairing, you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, are they doing the combo to get like almost 20 lore in a single turn potentially? And I think, yes, that's always a concern, but more importantly, like the Emerald Steel packages that you can play are very versatile actually, and it'll be interesting to see the different variations of this deck that pop up. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel if you are interested in this color pairing, because even in Rise of the Floodborn, I was playing like 3 different variations of Emerald Steel. You had like the discard, the Beast Relentless version, like there was a couple others that you could play as well, and it was very, very interesting. But the opponent being on this Robin Hood here is a telltale sign that they're ready to shift into the new Robin Hood, which in my opinion is a great card. Unfortunately, they dropped the Ursula, and this is what I mean when I was saying in the last match, like this new Ursula is absolutely devastating. So they opt not to rip the whole new world. They fear the grab your swords more, and now they have knowledge of my whole hand here. On turn 3, there is a case to be made that I should smash the 1-drop Robin Hood to keep the opponent off shifting right away. And I think this is what I opt to do, which is, again, a hard read that you have Robin Hood. In hindsight, you know, what else was I going to do? Establish a Benja that doesn't take out an item, so I think it's okay to smash there. And I'm not really fearing this Ursula. If it does quest, I'll just trade into it with the Smee. And yeah, Smee will get banished at the end of the turn because it will take another damage after challenging and being exerted. But it doesn't even get the chance to do that because the opponent let the storm rages on. They quest with the Ursula, and it looks like I am very much so behind. I play out the Bell just so that I don't pass on nothing. And this is the whole underwhelming factor of Sapphire Steel now, where the deck just seems very slow. But of course, when you get things established, especially if you're not playing against Ruby, like I mentioned, it's almost impossible to beat this deck, right? Because you need a hard board wipe. Anyways, the opponent continues to build their board, and thankfully we top deck Inkable so that we're able to play the Cogsworth. The opponent knows I have a whole new world here, and as anticipated, they did have the Shift Robin Hood. I think they inked one last turn as well. But thankfully they don't have another Ursula, right? Because this is the risk I run now with this deck, with these whole new world decks. You might be thinking that whole new world's been spiking up in price. It's such a good card. It's so powerful. But look how vulnerable you are when you play this. You have to play very strategically now in holding additional cards. But even if you kept the whole new world, like Ursula will just rip it out of your hand anyways, right? Because they get to choose. And I think Bare Necessities is the same way. So these are like 2 very powerful cards coming into the metagame that will see a lot of play. And you can just see how powerful they are, right? If the opponent ended up ripping that whole new world out of my hand, they could have prevented what ended up happening here, but it wasn't necessarily a misplay to take the Grab Your Swords, but you can see that I just ended up aggressively dumping my hand because this is what Sapphire Steel wants to do. So we take a look at what the opponent lost. I think they lost like a Beast Tragic Hero and 2 Grab Your Swords. They're using the new Helga, which is a very interesting card. I kind of overlooked this card, but I do think it is worth looking at. Unfortunately, it is an uninkable, but at a 4/4 body, it is somewhat relevant. And, you know, when it quests, dealing 3 damage to a damaged character, you know, can definitely put in that work. Thankfully, though, we have the ultimate combo stopper or damage stopper in Cogsworth, because this card single-handedly beats the Beast Relentless, the Sheriff of Nottingham, and the Bayou combination. So yeah, correct pronunciation there. But you can see there the opponent just scooped up once they realized we outed their board. And this is what I mean when I say Sapphire Steel. Once you get up there in the ink count, if you're going up against anything other than Ruby, it's almost impossible for any other deck to deal with. And that is the strength of Sapphire Steel, right? Because you need a board wipe. The opponent kind of realized there that if I didn't have a way to out their board, which they don't, they have just a very powerful board with a Cogsworth, with resist. I can't deal enough damage with like Grab Your Swords and these other small pinging damage things with steel. So I'm just going to end up losing the race, and they just end up scooping it up there. Anyways, that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment, and if you made it this far in the video, a like would also be appreciated. Make sure you are subscribed for more new decks from into the Inklands set. And I will be posting or trying to post some real life content like a box opening and maybe some real life gameplay at my locals if I can get my camera setup going. But yeah, this video is almost 15 minutes, so let's go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.